The whiskey bottle shattered against the wall 3 inches from Elias Crow's head. He didn't flinch, just kept wiping down the bar with that same methodical circular motion he'd been using for the past 11 years, the rag moving in slow, patient loops across wood that had soaked up more violence than most battlefields. Glass tinkled to the floor. Whiskey dripped down the wallpaper. The faded floral pattern Sarah had picked out back when this place still felt like it might become something. "I said pour me another." Brock Vance's voice carried across the saloon like a rattlesnake's warning. He was a big man, the kind of big that came from breaking things: bones, doors, wills. His leather duster was caked with trail dust and what might have been dried blood. Might have been. Probably was. Elias set down the rag, folded it twice, placed it exactly parallel to the bar's edge. His movements had the precision of a man who measured everything, even gestures that didn't matter. "You haven't paid for the first one," he said. The saloon went quiet. Not the comfortable quiet of men thinking their own thoughts, but the held-breath quiet of animals sensing a predator. There were maybe 15 people scattered across the tables, miners still dusty from the collapsed shaft on Copper Ridge, ranch hands nursing their weekly wages, a traveling salesman who'd made the mistake of thinking Timber Hollow was civilized enough for commerce. They all knew what came next. They'd seen it play out 100 times in 100 ways, and it always ended the same. The man with the gun won. The man behind the bar lost. Brock stood up. His chair screamed against the floorboards. He was 6'4" and carried 2 Colt navies on his hips, like a man who knew exactly how to use them. Behind him, his 3 boys shifted in their seats. Younger versions of the same mean, all of them wearing that special kind of smile men get when they know consequences don't apply. "You got a hearing problem, old man?" Brock's boots hit the floor with the deliberate weight of someone who'd spent years learning how to make an entrance. "Or maybe you just tired of living?" Elias looked at him. Really looked at him. His eyes were gray. Not the soft gray of weathered stone, but the gray of winter skies that promised nothing good. For just a second, something moved behind those eyes. Something old and cold and very, very tired. "The whiskey cost 2 bits, Elias said. "You drank it. You pay for it." One of Brock's boys, the youngest one with the scar across his cheek, laughed. It came out high and nervous like a coyote's bark. "Jesus, Brock, the old bastard's got sand." "Sand." Brock rolled the word around like he was tasting it. He walked toward the bar, each step measured, theatrical. This was a performance, and everyone there knew their role. Elias was supposed to back down. Brock was supposed to take what he wanted. The town was supposed to watch and remember why they paid protection money every month. But Elias didn't move. "You know who I am?" Brock stopped 3 feet from the bar, close enough that Elias could smell the trail on him, sweat and gunpowder and the particular stink of men who believed the world owed them everything. "I know." "Then you know I don't pay for drinks in towns I own." "You don't own this town." Elias's voice never rose above conversational, never hardened into challenge. He stated it like he might state the price of eggs. "You take money from scared people. That's not the same thing." Brock's smile disappeared. The saloon got even quieter, if that was possible. Somewhere in the back, a man's breathing sounded loud as a windstorm. "Say that again." "You heard me fine the first time." Brock's hand drifted toward his gun. Not fast. He wasn't drawing, not yet, just letting it rest there. A reminder. "You got a family, old man?" "Had one." "Where are they?" "Gone." "That's a shame." Brock's smile came back, meaner than before. "Means nobody's going to cry when I drag your corpse into the street and leave you for the dogs." Elias picked up his rag again, started wiping the bar. "You going to pay for that whiskey or not?" For a moment, Brock just stared. Men like him weren't used to being ignored. They built their entire existence on fear, and fear required attention. Being dismissed, being treated like you were nothing more than a customer who couldn't cover his tab, that was worse than being challenged. "You're making a mistake," Brock said quietly. "Wouldn't be my first." Brock's hand closed on Elias's collar. The older man didn't resist, didn't pull back. He just stood there, half pulled across his own bar, looking at Brock Vance with those winter sky eyes. "I'm going to teach you something about respect," Brock said. He yanked Elias forward, dragged him around the bar. The bartender's feet caught on the edge, and he stumbled. A man in his 60s, thin as a fence rail, no match for someone half his age and twice his size. The saloon's patrons looked away. That was the rule. See nothing, remember less, survive another day. Brock threw Elias toward the center of the room. The older man hit the floor hard, rolled, came up on his knees. His shirt had torn. There was blood on his lip where he'd bitten the inside of his cheek. Get up. Brock stood over him, thumbs hooked in his gun belt. Get up so I can knock you down again. Elias pushed himself to his feet, slowly, moving like every joint hurt. He swayed a little, and for a second it looked like he might fall on his own. This is sad, Brock announced to the room. This is just goddamn sad. This is what you people let run your waterhole? This dried up piece of... Elias hit him. It wasn't a big punch, wasn't theatrical or powerful or backed by anything except decades of knowing exactly where to put your knuckles. It snapped Brock's head to the side and split his lip, and more importantly, it shocked him into absolute stillness. The outlaw touched his mouth, looked at the blood on his fingers, looked at Elias. You just made the last mistake you're ever gonna make, he said. He swung. Elias ducked under it. Not gracefully, not smoothly, but with the economy of motion that comes from understanding angles and leverage and how big men punch. Brock's fist whistled through empty air. He spun, swung again. Elias stepped inside it, drove an elbow into Brock's solar plexus. The outlaw's breath went out in a whoosh. He staggered back and something changed in his eyes. The performance was over. The theater had closed. This was real now. Boys, he gasped. The three men at the table stood up. They moved like a pack, spreading out, surrounding. The youngest one, Scar-Cheek, pulled a knife. The other two kept their hands near their guns. Elias backed toward the bar. He wasn't running, just creating distance, buying seconds. His breathing had changed, faster, harder, the kind of breathing that meant a man was making calculations. You're dead, Brock said. He'd gotten his wind back. His hand was on his gun now, really on it. You're dead, and then we're going to burn this shithole to the ground. Maybe. Elias's back touched the bar. Maybe not. 4 against 1, old man. You like those odds? I've seen worse. Scar-Cheek laughed again, that same nervous coyote bark. Brock, let me cut him. Let me cut him slow. But Brock wasn't laughing anymore. He was looking at Elias, really looking at him, and something in the old man's posture had changed. The stoop was gone, the fragility. He stood straight now, balanced on the balls of his feet, and his hands hung loose at his sides. You know what I think? Brock said slowly. I think maybe you ain't just some bartender. Everyone's just something, Elias said. Who are you? I'm the man asking you to walk away. Walk away? Brock's voice rose. Walk away? You think you can talk to me like that? You think you can put hands on me and then just tell me to walk away? I think you should consider it. One of the other gang members, a thick-necked man with a broken nose, spoke up. Brock, what are we waiting for? Let's just shoot this crazy bastard and be done with it. But Brock held up a hand. He was studying Elias now, studying him the way you might study a card game when the stakes were too high and the tells too subtle. You talk like a man who thinks he's got a chance, Brock said. That's interesting. That's real interesting. Because from where I'm standing, you're one old drunk who's about 3 seconds from being planted in the ground. Time's a circle, Elias said. Things come back around. The hell does that mean? Elias didn't answer. He just stood there, waiting. And in that waiting, something shifted in the room. The miners who'd been looking away glanced up. The ranch hands stopped pretending to study their drinks. Even the traveling salesman leaned forward, sensing that whatever was about to happen, it was going to be the kind of story men told for years. Brock's hand twitched toward his gun. Just a twitch, testing. Elias's eyes tracked the movement, didn't blink, didn't react, just tracked it. You're fast, Brock said. It wasn't a question. You think you're faster than me? I don't think about it at all. Everyone thinks about it. Everyone who's ever stood where you're standing right now, they all thought about whether they could beat me. And you know what? They were all wrong. How many? Elias asked. How many what? How many men you killed? Brock smiled. Lost count after 20. That's because you're keeping score of the wrong thing. What's the right thing? How many you let live? Scarcheek spat on the floor. Brock, this is horse shit. Let's just— Shut up, Brock snapped. He never took his eyes off Elias. I know you, not your name, not your face, but I know what you are. I can smell it on you. You've killed before. Long time ago. How long? Long enough that I thought I was done. Nobody's ever done. Not really. It's in you, same as it's in me. Difference is, I don't pretend otherwise. Elias was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice carried something that might have been regret. You're young. You think you've got it all figured out, but you don't know anything about what's in me. So show me. Brock's hand hovered over his gun. Show me what I don't know. The standoff stretched. Seconds became minutes. Sweat ran down the back of the traveling salesman's neck. One of the miners gripped his table so hard his knuckles went white. Then Elias moved. Not toward his gun. He wasn't wearing one. He reached under the bar, slow and deliberate, telegraphing every motion. His hand came back holding a gun belt. Old leather, cracked and faded. The holster was worn smooth from years of use, and the revolver it held was unlike anything most of the room had ever seen. Not a Colt, not a Remington. Something custom, the metal dark with age and oil. He laid the gun belt on the bar between them. I'll make you a deal, Elias said. You and your boys walk out of here right now. This never happened. You forget about the whiskey. I forget about my split lip. We go our separate ways. And if we don't? Elias looked at the gun belt, looked at Brock. Then I put this on, and we settle it like men. Brock laughed. It started as a chuckle and built into something bigger, meaner. You're challenging me? You, a dried-up old bartender, you're challenging Brock Vance to a draw? I'm giving you a choice. There's no choice, old man. There's you dying one way or you dying another. Maybe. Brock turned to his boys. You hearing this? You hearing this crazy son of a bitch? They laughed with him, but it sounded forced, hollow. Because something about the way Elias stood there, something about the absolute calm in his eyes, made the whole thing feel wrong. Thick Neck spoke up again. Brock, let's just shoot him and go. Something ain't right here. What ain't right, Brock said, still grinning, is this old fool thinking he can outdraw me. That's what ain't right. That's goddamn hilarious. But he hadn't drawn yet. Hadn't called Elias's bluff. He stood there, hand near his gun, trying to read the old man's face. Who are you? Brock asked again, quieter this time. Someone who's trying to spare you. Spare me? You're young, you're mean, you've hurt a lot of people, but you're not dead yet. That means there's still time to be something else. I am what I am. Then you're a fool. Brock's face went red. Last chance, old man. Last chance to get on your knees and beg. Elias picked up his gun belt, buckled it around his waist. The leather settled against his hips like it had never left. His hand dropped to the revolver's grip, and even that small gesture, fingers wrapping around worn wood, looked practiced. Dangerous. No begging, Elias said. Street, 5 minutes, you and me. The saloon exploded into motion. Men scrambled for the doors, chairs scraping, voices rising. They'd talk about this for years, the day the bartender challenged Brock Vance, the day Timber Hollow stopped being quiet. Brock stood frozen for a moment, caught between fury and something that might have been doubt. Then he spat on the floor and stalked toward the exit, his boys following. At the door, he turned back. 5 minutes, he said, and then I'm going to paint this street with you. Elias didn't respond. He was checking the revolver, moving with the kind of muscle memory that transcended thought. He opened the cylinder, examined each round, snapped it closed. The sound was sharp in the emptying saloon. When everyone else had cleared out, one man remained. Doc Hayes, the closest thing Timber Hollow had to a physician, sat at a corner table, his medical bag at his feet. Elias, he said quietly. The bartender looked up. I've been in this town 12 years, Doc Hayes continued. In all that time, I never saw you wear a gun. Never even saw you raise your voice. First time for everything. Is it? The doctor stood, walked closer. Or is this something else coming back? Does it matter? It might. To you. Elias holstered the revolver. He wouldn't let it go. Men like Brock never do. That's what makes them what they are. I know. So why not just leave? Saddle a horse and ride out. You'd have a day's head start before he came looking. And then what? Elias looked at the doctor. He burns the saloon, kills whoever he thinks helped me, terrorizes this town for the next 10 years because one old man wouldn't bend. That was going to happen anyway. This is Timber Hollow, Elias. This is what it is. Then maybe it's time it became something else. Doc Hayes was quiet for a moment. Then he picked up his bag. I'll be outside, in case I survive. In case either of you do. The doctor left. Elias stood alone in the empty saloon. The afternoon light slanted through the windows, catching dust motes, making everything look softer than it was. He could hear voices outside, the whole town gathering, excited and terrified and drawn to violence the way moths are drawn to flame. He walked to the back room, Sarah's room, though she'd been gone 11 years now. Cancer had taken her slow, and near the end she'd made him promise. No more guns, no more death, a quiet life, a peaceful end. He'd kept that promise. Right up until today. The room was exactly as she'd left it. He sat on the bed, felt the weight of the revolver on his hip, closed his eyes. I'm sorry, he whispered to the empty air. I tried. Outside, someone shouted that 4 minutes had passed. Elias stood, walked to the mirror. The man looking back was old, 63, though he looked older. Gray hair, weathered skin, eyes that had seen too much and forgotten too little. But when his hand dropped to the gun, those eyes changed, sharpened, became something else entirely. He walked to the front door, pushed it open. The street was lined with people. Every citizen of Timber Hollow who could walk had come to watch. They pressed against storefronts, perched on porch rails, filled windows, silent, waiting. Brock stood in the center of the street, 50 feet away. His boys flanked him, but they'd stepped back. This was Brock's show, Brock's kill. Elias stepped down from the boardwalk. His boots hit the dirt, and the sound carried in the breathless quiet. You actually showed, Brock called out. Gotta respect that. Most men would have run. Elias walked forward, steady, measured. The crowd parted like water. Still got time to run, Brock continued. Still got time to get on your knees. Elias stopped 30 feet away, drew a line in the dirt with his boot. Last words, Brock asked. You first. Brock laughed. All right. All right, old man. Here's my last words to you. You should have paid me when I asked. You should have shown respect. And you should have died quiet instead of making me do this in front of everyone. My turn? Elias asked. Go ahead. Elias looked at him, looked at the boys, looked at the town watching from every shadow and corner. Your mother loved you once, he said to Brock, before you became this, before you decided fear was easier than being decent. She loved you, and somewhere in there you were a little boy who maybe could have been something else. Brock's smile disappeared. But you chose wrong, Elias continued. Every day, every choice, you chose to be this. And now you're standing in the dirt in a town that'll forget your name before your body's cold. And you think you've won something. You think you're powerful. I am powerful. You're nothing. You're what happens when potential curdles into waste. And after today, nobody's even going to remember which dusty trail you rode in on. Brock's face twisted. Draw. His hand flashed toward his gun. Elias was faster. The revolver cleared leather in a motion so smooth it looked choreographed. The shot cracked across the street like thunder. Brock's gun had barely cleared his holster when the bullet took him in the chest. He staggered, looked down at the spreading red, looked at Elias. How? He whispered. Then he fell. For a heartbeat, nobody moved. Nobody breathed. The sound of Brock's body hitting the dirt was the loudest thing in the world. Then Scar Cheek screamed and went for his gun. Elias shot him before he cleared leather. The boy spun, dropped, didn't get back up. Thickneck and the third man, a lanky kid who'd never said a word, both drew together. Elias's gun roared twice more. Thickneck took one in the shoulder, went down howling. The lanky kid's shot went wide, and Elias's return fire caught him in the leg. He collapsed, screaming. 4 shots. 4 seconds. 4 men down. Elias stood alone in the settling dust, the revolver still raised, smoke curling from the barrel. His hand was steady, his breathing was steady. Everything about him was steady, except his eyes. They held something broken and old and infinitely sad. Doc Hayes ran forward, bag in hand. He knelt beside Brock, checked for a pulse, shook his head, moved to Scar Cheek. Same result. The other 2 were alive, barely. The crowd started to emerge, slowly at first, then faster. They surrounded Elias, voices rising, hands reaching out to touch him like he was something holy. "You did it! He's dead! Brock Vance is dead! Did you see how fast? 4 shots, 4 men. Who is he?" That last question, shouted by someone in the back, cut through the celebration. Who is he? Elias lowered the gun, looked at the crowd pressing in around him, looked at Brock's body cooling in the street, looked at his own hand still holding the weapon that had ended 4 lives in as many seconds. "Get back," he said quietly. The crowd didn't hear him. They were too busy celebrating, too busy being drunk on the sudden possibility that maybe, just maybe, things could change. "Get back!" Louder this time, harder. They heard that. The crowd rippled, pulled away, created space. Elias holstered the revolver, started walking back toward the saloon. The crowd parted for him, silent now, sensing that whatever was happening, it wasn't celebration. Sheriff Miller, a useless political appointment who'd spent 3 years avoiding confrontation with Brock, stepped into Elias's path. "Wait," the sheriff said. "We need to talk about what happened here." "Nothing to talk about. You just killed 2 men and wounded 2 others. Self-defense. Whole town saw it." I know. I'm just saying we should discuss what comes next." Elias looked at him, really looked at him. "What comes next is you do your job. You send word to the territorial marshal. You clean up the bodies. You lock up the survivors. But Brock's gang, there's more of them. They're going to come looking for revenge. Let them come." "Elias," the sheriff's voice dropped. I need to know who you are, what you are. Because that," he gestured toward the bodies, "that wasn't luck. That was something else." Elias was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried across the street, loud enough for everyone to hear. 20 years ago, there was a man who taught people how to kill. He was good at it, better than anyone. He trained gunfighters, lawmen, outlaws, didn't matter who, long as they paid. He thought he was building something, thought speed and precision were virtues. He paused. The crowd pressed closer. Then one day, one of his students, a kid he'd trained personally, robbed a bank in Kansas, killed 3 people, including the man's wife and daughter. They were in the wrong place at the wrong time. The kid didn't even know who they were, didn't matter. Dead is dead. Someone in the crowd gasped. That man buried his family, buried his guns, changed his name, came to a dying town in the middle of nowhere and spent 11 years pouring drinks and trying to forget what he'd built. Elias looked around at all of them. That man was me. Is me. Elias Crow used to be Jacob Reed, and Jacob Reed taught killers how to kill faster. And everything that happened today, every drop of blood in this street, that's on me twice over. Once for today. Once for building the world that created men like Brock Vance. The silence was absolute. "So don't celebrate," Elias said. "Don't treat this like some kind of victory. 4 men are dead or dying because I couldn't let something go. Because pride is poison and violence is the easy answer. And now you all know what I am, which means everything changes. Again." He turned back toward the saloon. "Elias," Doc Hayes called after him, "what are you going to do?" Elias stopped at the door, didn't turn around. "I'm going to have a drink," he said, "and then I'm going to figure out how to live with what I just did." He went inside. The door swung shut behind him. The crowd stood in the street, uncertain, the celebration dying in their throats. Inside the saloon, Elias poured himself 3 fingers of whiskey. His hands shook now. The steadiness was gone, replaced by tremors that rattled the bottle against the glass. He drank it in one swallow, poured another, drank that too. Then he sat down behind the bar and put his head in his hands. Outside, Doc Hayes began directing people to help with the wounded. Sheriff Miller stood over Brock's body, looking lost. The crowd slowly dispersed, moving like sleepwalkers, trying to process what they'd witnessed. And in the growing shadows, as the sun began its descent toward the horizon, Timber Hollow held its breath and waited to see what would come next. Because everything had changed, and everyone knew it. The quiet man wasn't quiet anymore. And God helped them all, every single one of them, for what that might mean. The whiskey didn't help. Elias sat in the dark saloon for 3 hours, watching the light die through the windows, and the whiskey didn't do a damn thing except make his hands shake worse. He'd poured 6 glasses and drunk them all, and now he just felt hollow and old and sick in a way that had nothing to do with alcohol. The door creaked open around 8. He didn't look up. "We're closed," he said. "Since when?" Doc Hayes' voice. Footsteps across the floor. The doctor pulled out a chair and sat down across from him. "Since you decided to become the fastest gun in Timber Hollow." "Don't." "Don't what?" "Don't make jokes. Not about this." Doc Hayes was quiet for a moment. Then he reached across and took the whiskey bottle, poured himself a drink. "The wounded ones will live." Thick neck, real name's Charlie Brennan, took the bullet in his shoulder, clean through. He'll have trouble lifting his arm for a while, but he'll survive. The other one, Tommy Vickers, bullet grazed his femoral but didn't sever it. He's lucky. Another inch and he'd have bled out in the street. "Lucky," Elias repeated. The word tasted like ash. "They're asking to see you." "No." "Elias, I said no." He finally looked up. His eyes were red-rimmed, exhausted. "What the hell would I say to them? Sorry I shot you? Glad you're not dead? Here's hoping you don't spend the rest of your life wanting revenge?" Doc Hayes sipped his whiskey. "They're not asking for an apology. They're asking because they want to know who you are, what you are. Same as everyone else in this town. I told them who I am. You told them who you were, past tense. But that man in the street today, that wasn't past tense, Elias. That was right now. That was real." Elias looked down at his hands. They were still shaking. "You know what the worst part is?" "Tell me." "It felt easy, like putting on an old coat, like nothing had changed at all." His voice cracked. 11 years, Doc. 11 years I spent trying to be someone else, and it took 4 seconds to prove it was all bullshit. Or maybe, Doc Hayes said carefully, it proved you're more complicated than you thought. There's nothing complicated about killing 4 men. There is when you spend 11 years not killing anyone. The door opened again. Sheriff Miller this time, looking nervous as a cat in a room full of rocking chairs. He held his hat in his hands, turning it over and over. "Elias," he said, "we need to talk. Everyone needs to talk tonight, apparently." The sheriff glanced at Doc Hayes, then back to Elias. "It's important." "Then talk." Miller pulled up a chair, sat down, cleared his throat twice before he managed to get words out. Brock had 7 more men. They're camped about 15 miles north, waiting for him to come back with the protection money he collected from the ranches. And when he doesn't show up, they're going to come looking." Elias said nothing. "You understand what I'm telling you?" Miller's voice climbed higher. 7 men, professional killers. They're going to ride into this town wanting blood, and we've got, what, me? 2 deputies who can barely shoot straight? A handful of ranch hands who've never been in a real fight? "So leave," Elias said flatly. "Pin your badge to the desk and ride out. Nobody would blame you." The sheriff's face went red. I'm not running. I'm trying to figure out what we do when they get here." "We?" Elias looked at him. "There's no we, Sheriff. This is my mess. I'll handle it." "Handle it how? By killing 7 more men?" "If that's what it takes." "Jesus Christ." Miller stood up, started pacing. You can't just keep killing people. That's not how this works." "Then how does it work?" Elias's voice was quiet, dangerous. "You tell me, Sheriff. You're the law. You've been the law for 3 years. So how does it work when men like Brock Vance ride into town and take whatever they want? How does it work when decent people get robbed and beaten and killed, and the man wearing the badge does nothing?" Miller stopped pacing. "That's not fair." "Fair?" Elias laughed. bitter and sharp. You want to talk about fair? Sarah was fair. She ran this saloon honest, treated every customer with respect, never watered down the whiskey or shortchanged anyone. And when she got sick, you know what happened? Brock Vance doubled his protection fee, said sickness was bad for business, and bad business meant higher rates. She died owing him money, Sheriff. My wife died in debt to the man who terrorized this town while you looked the other way. The silence that followed was thick enough to cut. I didn't know, Miller said quietly. You didn't want to know. There's a difference. Doc Hayes cleared his throat. Fighting amongst ourselves won't help when those 7 men show up. Then what will? Miller looked desperate. What the hell are we supposed to do? The door opened a third time. A woman this time, Martha Cookson, who ran the general store with her husband. She was in her 40s, built solid, with the kind of face that suggested she didn't tolerate nonsense. Sorry to interrupt, she said, but there's about 40 people outside who'd like a word with Mr. Crow. Elias closed his eyes. Tell them to go home. I did. They're not going. Martha. They're scared, Elias, and they're hopeful, and those two things together make people stubborn. She walked further into the saloon. You want my advice? Not particularly. I'm giving it anyway. Talk to them. Because right now you're the only thing standing between this town and whatever's coming, and people need to hear that you're not planning to run. I never said I wasn't running. You're still here, aren't you? Elias looked at her, then at Doc Hayes, then at Sheriff Miller. 3 people looking at him like he was supposed to have answers. All right, he said finally. 5 minutes. Outside, the crowd had grown. It wasn't just 40 people. It was more like 60, maybe 70. Every able-bodied adult in Timber Hollow, and some who weren't so able-bodied. They stood in the street under the light of hastily lit torches, murmuring among themselves, faces anxious and expectant. Elias stepped onto the boardwalk. The murmuring stopped. For a long moment, nobody spoke. Then a voice from the back, one of the miners from earlier, called out, Is it true? About who you are? Yes, Elias said. Jacob Reed. Someone else closer to the front. You're Jacob Reed, the gunfighting instructor. Was. You trained Wild Bill's deputy and that ranger who cleaned up Abilene, and I trained a lot of people. Elias cut him off. Most of them are dead now. That's what happens when you teach men to solve problems with bullets. A woman spoke up. But you could teach others. You could teach us. No. Why not? If Brock's gang is coming, teaching you to shoot won't help. Elias's voice carried across the crowd. You think a week of practice makes you a gunfighter? You think holding a pistol turns you into someone who can kill without hesitation? It doesn't work that way. You just get yourselves killed faster. Then what do we do? The miner again. Just wait for them to come? Wait for them to burn our homes and kill our families? You leave. Take your families and ride out. Go to Silver Creek or Baxter's Crossing or anywhere that's not here. Let them come to an empty town. The crowd erupted, voices overlapping, angry and desperate. This is our home. We can't just abandon everything. Some of us don't have anywhere else to go. Elias held up a hand. The crowd quieted, but barely. Listen to me. I know what you're feeling. I know you want to fight. But fighting means dying, and most of you aren't ready to die. And you are? A young man pushed to the front. Elias recognized him. Jack Porter, worked at the livery stable. Couldn't be more than 25. You're ready to die for a town you've been hiding in for 11 years? If it comes to that, why? Why now? Why not 10 years ago, or 5 years ago, or any of the 100 times Brock and his boys hurt people in this town? It was a fair question. Elias didn't have a good answer. Because today I ran out of patience, he said finally. Because today he pushed too far. Because today I was tired of being quiet. That's not good enough, Jack said. That's just pride. That's just you being angry. You're right, Elias looked at him. It is pride. It is anger. And that's exactly why you should leave. Because what I did today, what I'm willing to do when his gang shows up, that's not heroic. It's not noble. It's just violence. And violence spreads like sickness. You stay here, you'll catch it. Your children will catch it. This whole town will become something you don't recognize. Maybe, Martha Cookson called out. That's better than staying something we're ashamed of. Elias turned to her. You don't know what you're saying. Don't I? I've lived in Timber Hollow for 18 years, Elias. 18 years of watching good people leave because they couldn't stomach the fear anymore. 18 years of paying protection money while my husband worked himself sick trying to keep the store profitable. 18 years of feeling ashamed every time I saw Brock Vance's face. She stepped forward. You think violence is the worst thing? Let me tell you what's worse. Cowardice, accepting, letting yourself become small and scared and broken. That's worse. That's what kills you from the inside. Others in the crowd murmured agreement. She's right, someone said. We're already broken. We've been broken. At least this way we'd be doing something. Elias felt something tighten in his chest. They didn't understand. They thought this was about courage, about standing up, about becoming better. They didn't see what he saw, the blood, the bodies, the way violence created its own momentum until it consumed everything. You want to know the truth? He said. The truth is, I'm going to kill those 7 men when they come. I'm going to put them in the ground the same way I put Brock in the ground. And you're all going to watch, and some of you will cheer, and you'll think something changed today. But nothing changed. Nothing ever changes. It's just the same story playing out again and again, with different names and different faces. Then why do it? Doc Hayes had come outside, was standing at the edge of the crowd. If you really believe nothing changes, why stand and fight? Elias looked at him. Because I don't know what else to do. The honesty of it seemed to hit the crowd like a physical force. They went quiet, really quiet, and in that silence Elias felt the weight of every eye on him. I'm not a hero, he said. I'm not your savior. I'm a man who taught killers how to kill, and who spent 11 years pretending that didn't matter. And now I'm going to use those same skills to protect a town that probably doesn't deserve protecting. Not because it's right, not because it's noble, but because I'm too tired and too angry and too stubborn to do anything else. He turned to go back inside. Wait. A new voice. Young, uncertain. A kid pushed through the crowd, couldn't have been more than 16, tall and gangly, with a farmer's tan and nervous hands. My name's David. David Morrison. My pa runs the feed store. I know who you are, Elias said. I want to learn. The kid's voice shook, but he kept talking. I want to learn how to shoot, how to fight, how to be like you were in that street. No, please, I'm fast. I know I am. And I'm not afraid. I can help when they come. Elias walked down from the boardwalk, walked right up to the kid until they were inches apart. You're 16 years old. You've never killed anyone. You've probably never even pointed a gun at a living thing. And you're standing here telling me you want to learn how to be fast? Yes. Why? The kid hesitated. Then, because I'm tired of being scared. Because I want to protect my family. Because wrong answers. Elias's voice cut like a blade. You want to learn because you're angry. Because you think speed and skill will make you feel powerful. Because you saw me kill 4 men and it looked easy. And you want that for yourself. Don't lie to me and don't lie to yourself. David's face went red. That's not... It is. It's exactly what you're thinking. And here's the truth, kid. That feeling you're chasing, it'll destroy you. It destroyed me. It's destroyed every single person I ever trained who thought violence was the answer to fear. But you're still alive. Alive isn't the same as living. Elias stepped back. Go home. Hug your father. Help him in the store. Be grateful you've never had to learn the things I know. He went back into the saloon. This time, nobody followed. Inside, he poured another drink. Stared at it. Didn't drink it. The door creaked open an hour later. Elias didn't turn around. I'm done talking, he said. Good. So am I. The voice was unfamiliar. Elias turned. A man stood in the doorway, tall, maybe 50, with gray at his temples and a lawman's badge pinned to his vest. He carried himself like someone who'd seen things, survived things. His gun belt was worn but well-maintained, and his eyes were sharp. Who are you? Elias asked. U.S. Marshal Thomas Hendricks. He walked to the bar, uninvited. Heard there was some trouble in Timber Hollow. Thought I'd ride down and see for myself. You're a long way from anywhere. So are you, Mr. Reed, or do you prefer Crow now? Elias set down his glass. How'd you know? I make it my business to know things. Hendricks leaned against the bar. Especially when someone with your reputation suddenly appears after 11 years of being dead. I wasn't dead, just gone. Same thing, in this line of work. The marshal studied him. I saw the bodies, saw where you put the bullets, center mass, all of them. No hesitation, no waste. That's not the shooting of someone who's rusty. Is there a point to this conversation? The point is, I need to decide what to do with you. Elias laughed. It came out harsh and ugly. Do with me? I defended myself. Whole town saw it. I know. I also know Brock Vance's gang is going to come looking for revenge. And when they do, there's going to be more bodies, more blood. And I'm trying to figure out if that makes you a problem or a solution. Neither. I'm just a man trying to survive. No. Hendricks shook his head. You're Jacob Reed. You're the man who wrote the manual on close-quarters gunfighting. You're the man who trained half the fast guns in 3 territories. You're not just a man, you're a weapon. Was a weapon. Weapons don't retire, Mr. Reed. They just wait. Elias was quiet for a moment. Then, what do you want, Marshal? Hendricks pulled out a chair, sat down. I want to make you an offer. Not interested. You haven't heard it yet. Don't need to. Whatever it is, the answer's no. The territorial governor is trying to civilize the West. He's creating a new law enforcement training program, proper academy, proper curriculum, proper standards. He wants the best instructors money can buy. Hendricks paused. He wants you. Elias stared at him. You're joking. I'm not. Your methods, your techniques, they're legendary. You could train the next generation of lawmen, teach them to be fast, accurate, professional, help build something better than what we have now. I'm done teaching. Are you? Because from where I'm sitting, you're about to teach 7 men what happens when they come for you. That's teaching, Mr. Reed, just not the kind that builds anything. I said no. Hendricks stood. Think about it. When this is over, if you survive, come find me. The governor's office is in Carson City. They'll know where to send you. I won't be coming. Maybe. Maybe not. The marshal walked to the door, stopped. For what it's worth, I think you've already made your choice. You just don't know it yet. He left. Elias sat alone in the dark saloon, Hendricks's words echoing in his head. He picked up the glass of whiskey he'd poured earlier, looked at it, set it down without drinking. Outside, the town had gone quiet. People had returned to their homes, taken their fear and their hope and their questions with them. The street was empty except for the torches, burning low, casting long shadows. Elias stood, walked to the window, looked out at Timber Hollow, this dying town that had been his refuge for 11 years. It didn't look like much. Never had. Just a collection of wooden buildings and dirt streets and people trying to survive another day. But it was his. For better or worse, it was his. The next morning came cold and clear. Elias woke on the floor behind the bar, his back screaming, his head pounding. The whiskey hadn't helped with that either. He stood, stretched, looked at the gun belt hanging from a hook on the wall, looked away. The street outside was already busy, people moving with purpose, carrying lumber, hammers, bags of nails. Elias stepped onto the boardwalk and watched as the town transformed in front of him. They were building barricades. Martha Cookson directed traffic, pointing men towards strategic positions. The miners worked together to reinforce the sheriff's office. Ranch hands dragged wagons into defensive positions. Even the kids were helping, carrying water and supplies. Jack Porter saw him watching, walked over. We're not leaving, he said. Simple, defiant. I can see that. We talked about it, all night. And we decided, whether you help us or not, we're staying. This is our home. We're not giving it up without a fight. Elias looked at the work happening in the street. It was amateur, inefficient. The barricades wouldn't stop determined attackers. The defensive positions were poorly chosen. They were going to get themselves killed. You're doing it wrong, he heard himself say. Jack blinked. What? The barricades. You're building them too low, and you've got no crossfire positions. Anyone with half a brain could flank you in 30 seconds. So show us. Elias hesitated. This was the line. Cross it, and he wasn't just defending himself anymore. He was involving them, teaching them, building something. Where do you want them? Jack asked. Elias looked at the street, saw angles, sight lines, kill zones, saw the town the way he used to see battlefields. Move that wagon, he said, pointing. Angle it northwest. Put 2 men behind it with rifles. Then take those barrels and create a choke point near the saloon. Force anyone coming in to funnel through a narrow space. Jack started to move. Wait, Elias called after him. You're not going to be behind those barricades. Why not? Because you're going to be on the roof, high ground, with a rifle. You said you can shoot? Yes. Then prove it. But if you freeze when the time comes, if you hesitate for even a second, you get down and you get out of the way. Understood? Jack nodded. Ran off to organize the others. Doc Hayes appeared at Elias's elbow. So you're helping them. I'm keeping them from getting killed as fast. That's not what this is. Elias turned to him. Then what is it, Doc? What am I doing here? Something you should have done a long time ago. You're choosing a side. I chose a side yesterday, when I killed Brock. No. Yesterday you chose yourself, your pride, your anger. Today you're choosing them. Doc Hayes gestured toward the people working in the street. That's different. Maybe it was. Maybe it wasn't. Elias didn't have the energy to argue. He spent the rest of the morning directing the town's defense, moving barricades, positioning shooters, teaching the basics, sight picture, breathing, trigger control. Most of them would forget it all when the bullets started flying, but maybe, 1 or 2 would remember enough to survive. Sheriff Miller approached him around noon. Riders coming, 3 of them, North Road. Elias grabbed his rifle. Everyone to positions. The town mobilized, people scattered to their assigned spots. Rifles appeared in windows. The street emptied. The 3 riders came slow, deliberate. They stopped at the edge of town, sitting their horses, surveying the barricades and defensive positions with the practiced eye of men who'd seen combat. The one in the middle was older than the others, grizzled, scarred. He had a lieutenant's bearing. We're looking for Brock Vance, he called out. Elias stepped into the street, alone. You won't find him. Who are you? The man who killed him. The 3 riders went very still. That right? The leader's hand drifted toward his gun. You killed Brock Vance? And 3 of his boys, 2 more are locked up in the sheriff's office, patched up and waiting for the territorial marshal. You expect me to believe one man did all that? Believe what you want. The graves are real enough. The leader looked past Elias at the barricaded town, at the rifles pointing at him from windows and rooftops, at the people who'd decided to stay and fight. You've got yourself quite the setup here, he said. Quite the little army. Enough to make you and your friends very dead very quickly if you decide to cause trouble. That a threat? It's a fact. The 3 men exchanged glances. The leader spat in the dirt. Brock was an idiot. I told him this town wasn't worth the trouble. Told him to move operations north where the money's better. He didn't listen. And now he's dead. Yeah, now he's dead. The leader gathered his reins. You got a name? Elias Crow. That your real name? It's the one I use. The leader stared at him for a long moment. Then he smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. I'm going to tell you something, Mr. Crow. You think you won something today? You think killing Brock Vance made you a hero, but all you did was paint a target on this town. Word's going to spread about what happened here. And men, bad men, worse than Brock ever was, they're going to come looking. Because that's what happens when you make noise in a quiet place. Let them come. Brave words from a man hiding behind farmers and shopkeepers. I'm not hiding behind anyone. I'm standing right here. And if you and your 4 friends want to test me, step down off that horse and we'll settle it now. The tension stretched. The other 2 riders shifted nervously, but the leader just laughed. 4 friends? You think there's only 4 more? He shook his head. Brock had 30 men working for him across 3 territories. Most of them don't even know he's dead yet, but they will, and they'll come. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow. But eventually, this little town is going to drown in blood. And all because you couldn't let something go. He turned his horse. Tell those boys in the sheriff's office they can rot there for all I care, he said. Brock's dead. The gang's finished. Everyone's going to scatter and find new work. But you remember what I said, Mr. Crow? You made noise, and noise attracts predators. They rode out, disappeared back up the North Road. The town stayed at battle stations for another hour before Elias finally gave the all clear. People emerged from their positions, exhausted, relieved, buzzing with nervous energy. We did it, someone said. They backed down. We won. But Elias knew better. The leader's words rang in his head. You made noise, and noise attracts predators. This wasn't over. It was just beginning. 3 weeks passed without incident, and that bothered Elias more than an actual attack would have. The town had settled into an uneasy routine. Barricades stayed up. Watch rotations continued. Men kept rifles close while they worked their trades. Women inventoried ammunition instead of fabric. Children played quieter games, closer to home. Everyone waited for something that didn't come. Elias spent his days teaching. He hadn't meant to. It just happened. Jack Porter showed up behind the saloon one morning with his father's rifle, asking for pointers. Then David Morrison appeared with questions about stance. Then 2 of the miners. Then a ranch hand. Before he knew it, he had 15 people showing up every dawn, hungry to learn things he'd promised himself he'd never teach again. Your grip's wrong, he told Jack on a Tuesday morning. The kid had improved, but not enough. You're strangling it. Gun's not a snake. You don't choke it to death. Jack adjusted his hands, fired, hit closer to center this time. Better, again. They worked through the morning. Elias moved between students, correcting, demonstrating, occasionally firing around himself to show them what precision looked like. His hands didn't shake when he held a gun anymore. That bothered him too. Doc Hayes watched from the saloon's back porch, coffee in hand. When Elias called a break, the doctor walked over. You're good at this, he said. I've had practice. That's not what I mean. You're good at teaching, patient, clear. You actually care whether they learn. I care whether they survive. Same thing, isn't it? Elias reloaded his revolver. Didn't answer. Marshal Hendricks stopped by yesterday, Doc Hayes continued. Said he'd be back through in a month. Asked if you'd reconsidered his offer. What did you tell him? That you were busy turning shopkeepers into soldiers. They're not soldiers. They're just people trying not to die. And you're the man teaching them how. Doc Hayes sipped his coffee. Whether you call it teaching or training or just helping, you've chosen what you're doing here, Elias. You can't pretend you haven't. Before Elias could respond, Martha Cookson appeared around the corner of the building. She looked worried. We've got a problem, she said. The problem was sitting in Sheriff Miller's office, handcuffed to a chair, bleeding from a cut above his eye. He was young, maybe 19, and terrified. His name was Peter Donnelly, and he'd ridden into town an hour ago asking for Elias Crow. Says he's got a message, Miller explained, nervous as always. Wouldn't tell me what. Says it's for you only. Elias studied the kid. Who sent you? Man named Silas Cobb. Peter's voice shook. He runs operations out of Silver Creek now. Took over most of Brock's territory after word spread about what happened here. Never heard of him. You will. Everyone will. The kid swallowed hard. He sent me to give you a choice. What choice? Leave Timber Hollow, tonight. Ride out and never come back. If you do that, he'll leave the town alone. And if I don't? Peter looked at the floor. He's got 40 men. Professional killers, most of them. He says he's going to burn Timber Hollow to the ground and hang everyone who fought with you. Says he's going to make an example out of this place so nobody else gets ideas about standing up to him. The room went quiet. 40 men, Sheriff Miller whispered. Jesus Christ, 40. When? Elias asked. 3 days. He's giving you 3 days to decide. Why 3 days? Why not just attack now? Peter finally looked up. Because he wants you scared. He wants you to think about it, to know what's coming. He says fear's more useful than bullets. Smart man, this Silas Cobb. He's a monster, and he's coming whether you leave or not. He just wants to see if you'll run first. Elias turned to Miller. Let him go. What? But he just threatened, he's a messenger. You don't shoot the messenger. Elias looked at Peter. Tell Silas Cobb I'll be here when he arrives. Tell him to bring all 40 men. Tell him it won't be enough. Peter stood on shaky legs. Miller unlocked the cuffs. The kid rubbed his wrists, looking confused. You're just letting me go? You got a family, Peter? A sister. In Baxter's Crossing. Go to her. Don't come back this way. And don't ever work for men like Silas Cobb again. It'll get you killed. The kid nodded. Started for the door. Stopped. For what it's worth, he said quietly, I hope you win. Cobb's the worst kind of mean. The kind that enjoys it. He left. Miller immediately started pacing. 40 men, 40 trained killers. We've got, 20 people who can shoot straight? Maybe? And half of them will run the second the bullets start flying. Probably. That's it? That's all you've got to say? Elias walked to the window. Looked out at Timber Hollow, people going about their business, pretending everything was normal, pretending they weren't all living on borrowed time. We need to evacuate, Miller said. Everyone, women, children, anyone who can't fight, get them out before Cobb arrives. Agreed. And then what? The rest of us just wait here to die? No. Elias turned back. The rest of us make it expensive. By evening, the whole town knew. Elias called a meeting in the street, same as before, and laid out the situation. 40 men coming in 3 days. Professional killers. No mercy. The crowd's reaction split exactly how he'd expected. Half wanted to run. Half wanted to fight. And the half that wanted to fight didn't understand what fighting actually meant. We can beat them, Jack Porter insisted. We've got defenses, we've got training, we've got you. You've got 3 weeks of target practice, Elias said. That's not training. That's barely enough to keep you from shooting yourself in the foot. So what do we do? Just give up? I'm saying be realistic. 40 trained killers against 20 townspeople who've never been in a real fight? The math doesn't work. Then make it work. Martha Cookson stepped forward. You're Jacob Reed. You've trained the best. You know tactics, strategy, all of it. So teach us. We've got 3 days. Make it work. Elias looked at her. At all of them. Desperate, hopeful, doomed. Listen to me carefully, he said. If you stay, most of you will die. Not might die. Will die. I can teach you to shoot. I can teach you to take cover. But I can't teach you 11 years of experience in 3 days. When those men come, they will be faster, meaner, and more willing to kill than you can imagine. And the ones who survive, if any of you survive, you'll spend the rest of your lives remembering what it felt like to take another person's life, to watch friends bleed out, to hear screaming that doesn't stop even after the person making it is dead. The crowd shifted uncomfortably. So here's what's going to happen, Elias continued. Tomorrow morning, we evacuate everyone who can't or won't fight. Wagons, horses, whatever it takes. You go to Silver Creek or Baxter's Crossing or anywhere that's not here. You take your families and you survive. And abandon our homes? Someone called out. Homes can be rebuilt. People can't. What about you? David Morrison pushed to the front. You're staying, aren't you? Elias nodded. This is my fight. I started it. I'll finish it. Then we stay too. David's voice cracked but held. Some of us anyway. Not everyone, but some. Because if we all run, then Silas Cobb wins. He gets to say that one threat was enough to empty a whole town. And then what? He does it again somewhere else? How many towns have to die before someone stands up? Brave words from a kid who's never been shot at. You're right. I haven't. But I've been scared every day of my life since Brock Vance started collecting protection money. I've watched my father work himself sick paying that bastard. I've watched this town shrink and die because good people kept leaving, and I'm done being scared. David's hands were shaking, but his eyes were clear. Teach me to fight. Teach all of us. And maybe we die. But at least we die doing something. The crowd murmured agreement. Not everyone. Some people were already backing away, making plans to leave. But enough. Maybe a dozen who'd stay. Maybe 15 if he was lucky. Elias felt something twist in his chest. Pride mixed with guilt, mixed with resignation. These people were going to die because of him. Because he couldn't let go. Because he'd killed Brock Vance and started something that couldn't be stopped. All right, he said quietly. All right. Anyone who stays, be at the saloon at dawn tomorrow. We've got 3 days to turn you into something that might survive. It won't be enough, but it's what we have. The meeting broke up. People scattered to make their decisions. Elias walked back to the saloon alone. Doc Hayes found him an hour later, sitting in the dark with a glass of whiskey he hadn't touched. 15 people, the doctor said. That's how many signed up to stay. 15 against 40. Bad odds. The worst. Doc Hayes sat down. I'm staying too. You don't fight. No, but people are going to need medical attention. Figured I'd be useful. You'll just be another target. Probably, but I didn't come to this town to watch it die without trying to save it. They sat in silence for a while. Then Doc Hayes asked the question Elias had been avoiding. Do you think we can win? Elias looked at his untouched whiskey. No. Then why fight? Because the alternative is worse. The next 3 days moved like a fever dream. Dawn to dusk, Elias ran the 15 volunteers through everything he could cram into their heads. Shooting drills. Cover positions. Reloading under pressure. What to do when someone next to you dies. How to keep moving when every instinct screams to freeze. Jack Porter was the best of them. Natural talent combined with genuine dedication. He could shoot, move, think under stress. David Morrison tried hard but overthought everything. The miners were tough, but slow. Martha Cookson surprised everyone by being a decent shot and utterly unshakable under pressure. Elias also taught them things they didn't want to learn. How to make improvised explosives from mining supplies. How to set fire traps. How to maximize damage when you're outnumbered. Ugly tactics for an ugly fight. This isn't honorable, David said on the second day, looking at the jar of black powder and nails Elias was assembling into a crude bomb. War isn't honorable, it's survival. Is that what this is? A war? It's what it becomes when 15 people try to stop 40 killers. They also fortified, reinforced the barricades, created fallback positions inside buildings, set up overlapping fields of fire. Elias mapped out the entire town as a battlefield, identifying every advantage, every choke point, every place where defenders could hurt attackers before dying. Because they would die. Most of them. Maybe all of them. Elias knew it. He suspected they knew it too. But they kept showing up every morning, kept practicing, kept preparing for something they couldn't possibly survive. On the evening of the second day, Marshal Hendricks rode back into town. Heard you've got trouble coming, he said, dismounting in front of the saloon. Word travels fast. It does when Silas Cobb sends messengers to every town within 50 miles, announcing he's going to make an example out of Timber Hollow. Hendricks tied his horse. Thought I'd stop by and see if you'd reconsidered my offer. Leave now. Come work for the territorial government. I can get you out before Cobb arrives. And abandon these people? These people chose to stay. You didn't force them. I inspired them. Same thing. Hendricks studied him. You really think you can win this? No. Then why stay? Elias gestured toward the town. You see those barricades, those defensive positions? 3 days ago, these people didn't know which end of a rifle to hold. Now they're preparing to fight 40 professional killers. They're going to die. But they're going to die standing up instead of kneeling down. That matters. To who? To them. To me. Maybe to nobody else, but it matters. Hendricks was quiet for a moment. Then he did something unexpected. He pulled his badge off and set it on the bar. What are you doing? Elias asked. Being stupid. Hendricks picked up a rifle from the rack. Got room for one more volunteer? You'll lose your job. I was getting bored anyway. Despite everything, Elias almost smiled. You're an idiot. Takes one to know one. They spent that night going over tactics. Hendricks knew military strategy, real strategy, not just gunfighting. Together, they refined Elias's defensive plan, created overlapping kill zones, positioned their best shots for maximum effect, set traps that would thin Cobb's numbers before the real fighting started. It's still not enough, Hendricks said around midnight. Even with perfect execution, we're going to lose. I know, but we'll make them bleed for it. That's the idea. The third day dawned cold and gray. Clouds rolled in from the west, heavy with the promise of rain. The evacuation had finished the day before. Women, children, elderly, anyone who couldn't or wouldn't fight. The town felt empty, hollow, like a corpse waiting for burial. Elias gathered his 15 volunteers, 16 now, with Hendricks in the saloon. They looked tired, scared, but present. That counted for something. "Last chance," he said. "Anyone wants to leave, now's the time. No shame in it. No judgment." Nobody moved. "All right then. Here's what's going to happen. Cobb and his men will probably arrive mid-afternoon. They'll come from the North Road because that's the only approach wide enough for 40 riders. We've set charges on the road. Mining powder, nails, scrap metal. Hendricks will detonate them when the group's clustered tight. That'll kill or wound maybe 5 to 10 men right off." He pointed to positions on a crude map of the town. "The survivors will scatter and take cover. That's when our shooters on the roofs open up. Jack, David, Martha, you're our best shots. You take your time. You make every bullet count. The rest of us will be in these positions, creating crossfire. We let them come to us. We make them fight for every inch." "What if they just burn us out?" one of the miners asked. "They might. If they do, we fall back to the saloon. It's brick, harder to burn. We make our stand here." "And then what?" David's voice was quiet. "After the saloon?" Elias met his eyes. "Then we've done everything we could." The morning stretched. People checked weapons, reviewed positions, wrote letters to family members who'd evacuated. Some prayed. Elias noticed but didn't comment. Let them find comfort where they could. Noon came and went. The clouds grew heavier. The first drops of rain started to fall around 1 o'clock. By 2, it was a steady drizzle, making everything cold and miserable. "Rain's bad for powder," Jack said from his position on the general store roof. "What if the charges don't blow?" "Then we shoot more and die faster," Elias called back. "No use worrying about it now." At 2:30, the lookout shouted from the church steeple, "Riders! North Road! A lot of them!" Everyone scrambled to positions. Elias moved to his spot behind a reinforced wagon, rifle ready. Hendricks crouched nearby with the detonator, a crude device rigged to the powder charges buried in the road. Through the rain, they came. 40 riders, just like Peter Donnelly had said. They moved in a loose formation, confident, unhurried. Men who'd done this before. Men who knew how it would end. At the front rode Silas Cobb. Elias recognized him immediately, mid-40s, heavy build, with the kind of face that suggested he'd been mean even as a child. He wore a duster that had probably been expensive once, and his gun belt held 2 matching Colts with ivory handles. The riders approached the prepared charges. Closer, closer. "Now," Elias whispered. Hendricks triggered the detonator. Nothing happened. "Damn rain!" Hendricks hissed, trying again. Still nothing. Cobb's men kept coming. They'd reached the edge of town now, spreading out, dismounting, professional, organized. "Forget the charges," Elias said. "Shooters, light them up." 3 rifles cracked from the rooftops. One of Cobb's men went down, then another, then a third. But 40 men don't panic easy. They scattered to cover, returning fire. The battle began. It was chaos. Bullets ricocheted off brick and wood. Someone screamed. Someone else shouted orders. Rain made everything slick, made aiming harder, made reloading fumble-fingered and desperate. Elias fired methodically. Breathe, aim, squeeze, breathe, aim, squeeze. Each shot deliberate, each shot finding flesh, but there were so many of them. To his left, one of the miners took a round in the chest, went down gasping. Doc Hayes scrambled over, tried to help, caught a bullet in the shoulder for his trouble. The doctor kept working anyway, one-handed, trying to stop bleeding that wouldn't stop. On the rooftop, Martha Cookson fired again and again, her face set in grim concentration. A bullet clipped her arm. She shifted position, kept shooting. David Morrison was pinned down behind a barrel. He looked terrified, but kept his rifle up, kept firing when he saw targets. Learning in real time, surviving minute by minute. The firefight raged for what felt like hours, but was probably only 20 minutes. Cobb's men were good. They advanced under fire, used covering positions, coordinated their attacks. Slowly, inevitably, they pushed the defenders back. "Fall back to the saloon," Elias shouted. The defenders retreated. Not running, that would get them killed. Moving in pairs, covering each other, making Cobb's men pay for every foot of ground. By the time they reached the saloon, 3 more townspeople were down. Dead or wounded, Elias couldn't tell in the chaos. They barricaded themselves inside. Hendricks and Jack shoved furniture against the door. Others took positions at windows. The saloon became a fortress. Outside, Cobb's men surrounded the building. The gunfire slowed, stopped. In the sudden quiet, they could hear the rain hammering the roof. "You fought good," Cobb's voice shouting from somewhere outside. "Better than I expected. But it's over now. You're surrounded, you're outnumbered, and you're out of options." Elias looked around the saloon. 8 people left standing, including himself. 4 wounded, 3 dead. In less than an hour, his force had been cut in half. "What do we do?" David whispered. Blood ran down his face from a graze wound. He looked young, so terribly young. Before Elias could answer, something crashed through the front window. A bottle, cloth stuffed in the top, burning. It shattered against the floor, spreading fire. Then another through a different window. Then a third. "They're burning us out!" someone yelled. Smoke filled the room. Flames climbed the walls. The heat built fast. "Back door!" Hendricks shouted. "Move!" They scrambled toward the rear exit. Jack kicked it open and immediately ducked as bullets ripped through the doorway. Cobb had men positioned there too, waiting. They were trapped. Fire behind, bullets ahead. The smoke thickened. Someone started coughing. Someone else was crying. Elias looked at the faces around him, scared, desperate, waiting for him to save them. He had nothing. No brilliant plan, no hidden ace, no way out. This was how it ended. Burning in a saloon he'd owned for 11 years, dying because he couldn't let go, taking good people with him into the dark. "I'm sorry," he said, barely audible over the fire. "I'm sorry I got you into this." "Don't." Martha Cookson grabbed his arm. She was bleeding from multiple wounds, but her grip was iron. "Don't you dare apologize. We chose this. We all chose this. Doesn't make it right. Makes it ours." The fire reached the bar. Whiskey bottles exploded like grenades. The heat was unbearable now. They had maybe 2 minutes before the roof came down. Elias made a decision. "When I go out that door," he said, "you follow fast. Stay low. Run for the church. Some of you might make it." "Elias, no." Not negotiable. He checked his revolver. 5 rounds left. Not enough. Never enough. "I'll draw their fire. You run. Understand?" They understood. Didn't like it, but understood. Elias moved to the back door, took a breath, started to step through. A gunshot cracked, different from the others, distant, powerful. Then another. Then a whole volley. The shooting outside changed, confused, disorganized. Cobb's men were yelling at each other. "What the hell?" Hendricks pushed to a window, looked out through the smoke. His face changed. "We've got reinforcements," he said, voice shocked. "Riders coming from the south, at least 30 of them. They're hitting Cobb's flank." Elias looked for himself. Through the smoke and rain he saw them. Mounted men in formation, firing with military precision. They'd caught Cobb's forces completely by surprise. "Who are they?" Martha asked. Elias watched the riders execute a perfect wheeling maneuver, cutting into Cobb's disorganized men like a scalpel. "Cavalry," he said. "Real cavalry. Someone sent the army." The battle outside intensified. Cobb's men, caught between the burning saloon and professional soldiers, broke, started retreating. The cavalry pursued, relentless. "Out the front," Elias ordered. "While they're distracted, move!" They burst through the front door into the rain. The fire hadn't reached this side yet. Cobb's men were scattered, fighting or fleeing. Nobody paid attention to the townspeople scrambling clear of the burning building. Elias got everyone to the church, the only defensible position left. They barricaded inside and watched through the windows as the cavalry methodically dismantled what remained of Cobb's gang. It was professional, efficient, brutal. Within 20 minutes, it was over. Cobb's men were dead, wounded, or captured. The few who'd escaped fled into the wilderness. The cavalry's commander dismounted, walked toward the church, knocked on the door. "Marshal Hendricks," he called out. "You in there?" Hendricks opened the door. "Captain Rodriguez?" "The same." The officer stepped inside, rain dripping from his uniform. "Got your telegraph yesterday. Rode hard to get here. Looks like we almost didn't make it." "You sent for them?" Elias stared at Hendricks. The marshal shrugged. 2 days ago. Figured we could use backup. Wasn't sure they'd arrive in time." "You didn't think to mention this?" "Would it have changed your tactics?" "No, but then it didn't matter. We prepared for the worst. Got lucky with the cavalry." Hendricks turned to Rodriguez. "Casualties?" "3 wounded on our side. 15 dead among the hostiles. 20 captured, including their leader, man named Silas Cobb. He's asking to negotiate." "He can ask all he wants," Elias said quietly. "Doesn't mean he gets it." Captain Rodriguez studied Elias. "You're Jacob Reed." "I am." "Heard about you. Heard you were dead." "Common misconception." "Well, you're alive now. And you've just helped break the biggest criminal operation in 3 territories. The territorial governor will want to meet you." Elias looked out at the burning saloon, at the bodies in the street, at the townspeople who'd survived, scarred, bloody, but alive. "I'm done meeting people," he said. But even as he said it, he knew it wasn't true. Something had changed today. Not just in Timber Hollow. In him. He'd fought not for pride or in anger, but for something else. For people who'd chosen to stand when they could have run. For a town that refused to die quiet. And maybe, just maybe, that meant something. Outside, the rain began to slow. The fire burned itself out. And in the settling quiet, Timber Hollow took its first breath of whatever came next. The bodies were still warm when the argument started. Captain Rodriguez wanted to transport the prisoners immediately. Sheriff Miller wanted trials held in Timber Hollow. The townspeople wanted hangings. Elias wanted everyone to shut up and let him think, but nobody was asking what he wanted anymore. They'd moved past asking. Now they were just talking at him. "These men murdered 3 of our own," Martha Cookson said. Blood had dried on her sleeve where the bullet had creased her. She hadn't bothered to get it properly treated yet. "They burned down half the town. They deserve to answer for it here." "Military jurisdiction supersedes local authority," Rodriguez countered. He stood rigid, like he had a board strapped to his spine. "These prisoners will be transported to Fort Rollins for proper trial and sentencing." "Proper trial?" Martha laughed, harsh and bitter. "You mean the kind where lawyers get them off on technicalities? Where they serve 5 years instead of hanging? Where they get out and do this all over again somewhere else? I mean the kind where due process is observed and the rule of law is maintained." "The rule of law?" She spat in the dirt. Where was the rule of law when Brock Vance was bleeding this town dry? Where was the army then? Rodriguez's jaw tightened, but he didn't rise to the bait. Professional to his bones, this one. Elias could respect that, even if it made him tired to watch. "We got here as fast as we could," the captain said. "When Marshal Hendricks sent word, 3 days," Martha cut him off, 3 days' notice, and you showed up at the last possible second. Real heroic timing. We rode through 2 rainstorms and nearly killed our horses getting here. If you're expecting an apology, I'm expecting you to let us handle our own justice." "That's not justice, that's revenge." "Sometimes they're the same thing." Elias finally spoke up. "They're not." Everyone turned to look at him. "Revenge is hot. It's personal. It feels good for about 5 minutes and then it hollows you out. Justice is cold. It's systematic. It doesn't care about your feelings." "And which one are you after?" Martha asked. "Neither. I'm after sleep." He stood, every joint protesting. He'd been sitting on the church steps for 2 hours and his body had decided to remind him he was 63 years old and had just fought a war. "You all figure it out. I'm done." He started walking toward what was left of the saloon. The front half was a charred skeleton. The back half might be salvageable if he cared enough to try. Right now, he wasn't sure he did. Doc Hayes caught up with him halfway there. The doctor's shoulder was bandaged and his arm in a sling, but he moved steady enough. "You're limping," he observed. "I'm old." "You got shot in the leg." Elias looked down. Sure enough, his left pant leg was soaked with blood below the knee. He hadn't even noticed. Adrenaline was a hell of a drug. Looks superficial, he said. Everything looks superficial until it gets infected and kills you. Sit down. Doc, sit down. Elias sat on what used to be the saloon's front steps. Doc Hayes knelt, awkwardly, one-armed, and examined the wound. It was a graze, deep enough to bleed heavy, but not deep enough to hit anything important. The doctor cleaned it with whiskey from a flask, wrapped it tight. You'll live, he said. Shame. Doc Hayes looked at him. You mean that? Elias didn't answer right away. He watched the townspeople arguing in the street, watched the cavalry soldiers securing prisoners, watched smoke still rising from the ruins. Everything he'd touched turned to ash eventually. Maybe he'd meant it, maybe not. Hard to tell anymore. I'm tired, Doc, he said finally. I'm so goddamn tired. Of what? All of it. Fighting, killing, watching good people die for bad reasons, teaching others how to do the same. He gestured at the town. 3 people dead, 5 more wounded. Half the main street burned, and for what? So we could prove a point? So we could say we didn't back down? So we could survive, Doc Hayes said quietly. That's not nothing, Elias. Survival at what cost? The only cost there is. Everything else is just details. They sat in silence. The rain had stopped, but the sky stayed gray, threatening more. Winter was coming early this year. Elias could feel it in his bones. Hendricks approached, still wearing his marshal's badge. Rodriguez must have given it back. Or maybe he'd never actually turned it in. Hard to say with Hendricks. Captain's taking the prisoners tomorrow morning, he said, including Cobb. There'll be trials at Fort Rawlins, military tribunal. They'll hang for this. Good, Elias said without much feeling. Governor wants to meet you. Sent word through Rodriguez. Says he's got a proposition. Already heard it. Not interested. You didn't hear this one. Hendricks sat down next to them, ignoring his clean uniform getting dirty on the ash-covered steps. He's not offering you a teaching position anymore. He's offering you command. That got Elias's attention. Command of what? New Territorial Law Enforcement Division. 50 men, professional training, military discipline. You design the curriculum, run the academy, shape the next generation of lawmen from the ground up. Hendricks paused. He's calling it the Frontier Marshal Program. Says what happened here proved the old system doesn't work. Says we need something new. Says you're the man to build it. He's wrong. Is he? You just turned 15 civilians into fighters in 3 days. Imagine what you could do with 50 dedicated recruits in a full year. I could create 50 more killers. That what the West needs? More people good at violence? No, Hendricks said. It needs people good at preventing violence. And when prevention fails, ending it quick and clean. That's what you do, Elias. That's what you've always done. You just spent 11 years pretending otherwise. Elias looked at his hands. They'd stopped shaking. That bothered him more than when they'd been shaking, like his body had accepted what his mind still resisted. I can't, he said. Why not? Because I'll fail. Because I'll teach them wrong. Because one of them will turn out like the kid who killed my family, and I'll have to live with that all over again. Or, Doc Hayes said, one of them will save a family, will stop a Brock Vance before he terrorizes a town for 3 years. Will make the frontier a little less bloody and a little more livable. That's possible too. You don't know that. You don't know it won't happen. So which uncertainty are you going to bet on? Before Elias could answer, a commotion erupted near the prisoners. Voices raised. Someone shouted. Rodriguez's cavalry moved quickly to contain whatever was happening. They walked over to find Silas Cobb standing in the middle of his bound men, face purple with rage. He'd been quiet since the capture, but something had set him off. I want to talk to Reed, he was shouting. Get me Reed. I got things to say. Rodriguez looked like he'd rather eat glass. Prisoner wants to speak with you. So I hear. Elias walked closer. What do you want, Cobb? The outlaw leader was a mess. Blood matted his hair from where someone had clubbed him during the capture. His expensive duster was torn and muddy, but his eyes still held that mean intelligence that made him dangerous. You cost me everything, Cobb said. My men, my territory, my reputation, all because you couldn't let Brock Vance die quiet. Brock didn't give me much choice. There's always a choice. You chose pride. You chose to make a stand. And now look at you. Cobb gestured at the ruined town. This what winning looks like to you? Looks better than losing. Does it? Because from where I'm standing, you lost just as much as I did. Maybe more. You lost men, lost your town, lost whatever peace you'd built for yourself. Cobb smiled, ugly and knowing. And the best part? You're going to keep losing, because word's going to spread about Jacob Reed, about the man who broke Brock Vance's gang, and mine. And every two-bit outlaw with something to prove is going to come looking for you. You made yourself famous again, Reed. Congratulations. How's that working out? Elias said nothing, because Cobb was right. Word would spread. Men would come. The quiet life was over, killed as surely as Brock Vance had been. I'm going to hang, Cobb continued. I know that. I made my choices and now I pay for them. But you? You're going to live. You're going to wake up every morning knowing you started something you can't finish. Every bullet fired in this territory for the next 10 years, that's on you. Every young gun looking to make a name, that's because of you. You wanted to matter again? Well, you matter. Hope it was worth it. Rodriguez stepped between them. That's enough. Get him out of here. Soldiers dragged Cobb away, but his words hung in the air like smoke. Elias stood very still, feeling the weight of them settle into his bones. He's trying to get in your head, Hendricks said. Don't let him. He's not wrong, though. He's not right either. You didn't start this. Brock did. Cobb did. Men like them create the violence. All you did was stop it. This time. What about next time? What about it? Elias turned to face him. How many Brocks are out there? How many Cobbs? How many towns like Timber Hollow, bleeding slow under men who take what they want because nobody can stop them? Too many, Hendricks admitted. And what's one man supposed to do about that? One man? Nothing. But one man training 50 others? Who trained 50 more? Who built a system that actually works instead of this patchwork of corrupt sheriffs and absent lawmen? Hendricks' voice gained intensity. That one man could change everything. Or make it worse. Then make sure you don't. Make sure you teach them right. Make sure the system you build prevents the mistakes you made. Hendricks grabbed his shoulder. You can't undo the past, Elias. None of us can. But you can shape the future. The governor's offering you that chance. Take it. Elias pulled away. I need to think. Think fast. Rodriguez leaves tomorrow. If you're going with him to meet the governor, you need to decide tonight. Elias walked away from all of them. Away from the arguments and the prisoners and the expectations. He walked to the edge of town where the buildings gave way to open territory. Stood looking out at the wilderness that stretched forever in every direction. Sarah had loved this view. Used to stand here in the evenings, watching the sunset, talking about the town they'd build together, the life they'd make, all the dreams that died with her. He could almost hear her voice now, almost feel her standing next to him. What would she say about all this? About the killing, the teaching, the choice hanging over him? He knew the answer. She'd say he was being stubborn. She'd say he was letting fear make his decisions. She'd say the man she married, the man before Jacob Reed became a name people feared, wouldn't hide from a chance to do good just because he might fail. She'd be right. She usually was. Figured I'd find you here. Elias turned. David Morrison stood a few yards back, looking uncertain. The kid's face was bandaged where the graze wound had split his scalp. He moved like everything hurt, which it probably did. You should be resting, Elias said. Can't sleep. Keep seeing it all again. The shooting, the fire. Tommy Vickers dying right next to me. David's voice shook. Does it ever stop? The remembering? No, you just get better at living with it. That's not encouraging. It's not supposed to be. It's supposed to be true. David walked closer, stood next to him looking out at the wilderness. I killed a man today. Maybe two. Hard to tell in the chaos, but I know I hit at least one. Saw him go down. How do you feel about it? I don't know. Sick, relieved, angry, proud, all of it at once. Is that normal? Normal as anything gets. They stood in silence for a while. Then David said, Thank you. For what? For teaching us. For staying. For giving us a chance to be something other than victims. He paused. My father wants to rebuild. The feed store burned, but he says we're not leaving, says this is home, says you proved it's worth fighting for. I didn't prove anything except that violence breeds more violence. Maybe, but you also proved that people can fight back, that they don't have to just accept tyranny. That matters, Mr. Crow. Or Mr. Reed, whoever you are. I don't know anymore, Elias admitted. Then maybe it's time to figure it out, because people are going to keep looking to you whether you want them to or not. Might as well decide what you're going to be for them. The kid was smarter than he looked. Elias turned that over in his mind as David walked back toward town. What did he want to be? Who did he want to be? The questions felt too big for his tired mind. He walked back slowly. Night had fallen while he'd been standing at the edge of town. The cavalry had set up camp in the town square. Fires burned. Men talked in low voices. The prisoners sat bound and silent, facing the consequences of their choices. Martha Cookson found him near the remains of the saloon. Building inspector came by, she said. Back half salvageable. Front half needs to be torn down and rebuilt. He figures 2 months of work if we can get the materials. I'm not rebuilding. She looked at him. You're leaving. Thinking about it? To go where? Carson City. Maybe, if I take the governor's offer. The training program. Martha nodded slowly. That makes sense. You're good at teaching, better than you want to admit. I'm good at creating killers. You're good at keeping people alive. There's a difference. She sat on the steps next to where he stood. I've been in Timber Hollow 18 years. Watched this town shrink from 300 people to barely 100. Watched businesses close. Watched families leave. Watched hope die a little more every year. And then you killed Brock Vance and everything changed. Changed to what? Burned buildings and dead friends? Changed to possibility. She looked up at him. For the first time in years, people are talking about the future, about rebuilding, about staying, about making this place into something real instead of just a place to survive. You did that. Not the killing, the standing up. The refusal to accept that might makes right. Standing up got 3 people killed. Living under Brock was killing us anyway, just slower. At least this way we chose our terms. Elias sat down next to her. His leg throbbed where Doc Hayes had bandaged it. His whole body felt like one giant bruise. I don't know if I can do what they're asking, he said quietly. Build a whole system, train generations of lawmen, get it right when I got it so wrong before. Then get it wrong again. But at least try. At least aim for something better than what exists now. Martha stood. The men you trained before. You taught them to be fast and deadly. Maybe this time you teach them to be smart and careful, to prevent instead of react, to value life instead of just being good at ending it. You've got a second chance here, Elias. Most people don't get those. She walked away, leaving him alone with his thoughts. The night deepened. Elias sat on the steps of his ruined saloon and watched Timber Hollow settle into uneasy sleep. Cavalry pickets walked patrol. Somewhere a baby cried. The wind carried the smell of burned wood and wet earth. Around midnight, Doc Hayes joined him. Brought a bottle of whiskey, not from the saloon that had all burned, from his personal stock. Thought you might need this, he said, handing it over. Elias took a drink. It burned going down, familiar and warm. He handed it back. I'm going to Carson City, he said. I know. How do you know? Because you're Jacob Reed, and Jacob Reed doesn't hide. He might want to, he might wish he could, but he can't. It's not in him. You say that like you know me. I've been doctoring you for 11 years. I know you better than you think. Doc Hayes took his own drink. You're going to build something good. I'm sure of it. Your confidence is misplaced. My confidence is based on evidence. You trained 15 civilians to hold off 40 professionals. You kept most of them alive. And more importantly, you taught them to think, not just shoot. That's the difference between you and whoever trained Brock Vance's gang. You actually care whether your students become better people. Caring doesn't guarantee results. No, but it guarantees effort, and effort's all we've got. Doc Hayes stood with a grunt. I'm too old to be sitting on cold steps. My back will never forgive me. Get some sleep, Elias. You've got a long ride tomorrow. He left the bottle. Elias sat alone until the first hints of dawn touched the eastern sky. Then he stood, bones protesting, and walked through the ruined saloon one last time. The back room, Sarah's room, had survived mostly intact. Her bed was still there, her dresser, the little mirror she'd used every morning. He stood in the doorway looking at the life he'd built here, the peace he'd found, the quiet he'd maintained for 11 years. All gone now, burned away in fire and blood and the choices that couldn't be unmade. "I'm sorry," he said to the empty room. "I tried to keep the promise. I really did." But Sarah wasn't there to answer. She'd been gone 11 years and would stay gone forever, and all the apologies in the world wouldn't change that. He took one last look around. Then he closed the door and walked out into the morning. Rodriguez's cavalry was already preparing to move, horses saddled, prisoners secured, men checking weapons and gear with military efficiency. Hendricks stood talking to the captain, both of them looking official and purposeful. They saw Elias approaching. "Made your decision?" Hendricks asked. "I'm going to Carson City. I'll meet with the governor. I'll hear what he has to say." Elias paused. "But I'm not promising anything. If I don't like what I hear, I walk. Understood?" "Understood. And I've got conditions." "Of course you do. Mom, I design the curriculum. I choose the instructors. I set the standards. Nobody interferes with how I train these men. The governor wants me to build something. He gives me the freedom to build it right." Rodriguez spoke up. "The governor doesn't take well to ultimatums." "Then he can find someone else. I'm not interested in being a figurehead while politicians make the real decisions. This works my way or not at all." The captain looked like he wanted to argue. Hendricks put a hand on his arm. "He'll agree," the marshal said. "He's desperate enough. The frontier's eating itself alive and the current system isn't working. He needs someone who can actually fix it." "And you think that's me," Elias said. "I think you're the only one who might actually try." They rode out an hour later. The cavalry column, the prisoners, Hendricks, Rodriguez, and Elias, on a borrowed horse since his own was too old for the journey. The townspeople came out to watch them leave. Martha Cookson raised a hand in farewell. Doc Hayes nodded. David Morrison looked like he wanted to say something but couldn't find the words. Jack Porter stood with his father, both of them watching the man who'd taught them to fight, ride away to teach others the same. Elias didn't look back. Looking back never helped anything. The past was done. The future waited, ready or not. They rode for 3 days, through rain and mud and cold that promised winter wasn't far behind. The cavalry maintained discipline, regular stops, careful watch rotation, no complaints. The prisoners stayed sullen and silent. Cobb glared at Elias whenever their paths crossed, but said nothing. The words he'd already spoken did their damage. On the third night, camped in a valley that gave some shelter from the wind, Hendricks sat with Elias by the fire. "You're quiet," the marshal observed. "I'm thinking." "About what?" "About how to teach restraint to men you're training to kill. About how to build a system that values de-escalation in a world that rewards violence. About how to not repeat the mistakes I made 20 years ago." Elias poked the fire with a stick. "About whether any of this matters, or if it's just rearranging deck chairs while the ship goes down. Dark thoughts for a man about to start a new chapter. Realistic thoughts for a man who's lived long enough to see patterns." Hendricks was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You want to know why I sent that telegraph to Rodriguez? Why I called in the cavalry? Figured you wanted us to survive. That, but also because I wanted you to see something. I wanted you to see what happens when professional, disciplined, properly trained lawmen arrive. They didn't massacre Cobb's gang. They neutralized them, captured most of them alive, minimal civilian casualties. Quick resolution. That's what good training produces. That's what you could build. Or I could train 50 men who become tyrants with badges. You could. If you train them wrong, if you select wrong, if you build the system wrong." Hendricks leaned forward. "But you won't. Because you've seen what goes wrong. You've lived with the consequences. That's going to make you careful. Probably too careful. But better too careful than too reckless." Elias watched the fire burn. "What if I fail anyway?" "Then you fail. But at least you tried. At least you pointed things in a better direction instead of just complaining about how bad they are. That's supposed to be inspirational? It's supposed to be practical. Inspiration's for poets. We're just men trying to keep other men from killing each other quite as often. They reached Carson City on the fourth day. It was bigger than Timber Hollow by an order of magnitude, a real town with brick buildings and paved streets, and people who looked at cavalry columns without immediate fear. Progress, of a sort. Rodriguez led them to the governor's mansion. It sat on a hill overlooking the town, all white columns and manicured grounds, the kind of place that reminded you who had power and who didn't. A secretary met them at the door, led Elias through hallways decorated with paintings of stern men doing important things, into an office where Governor Harrison Blackwood sat behind a desk the size of a small wagon. He was younger than Elias expected, maybe 45. Sharp eyes, politician's smile, the kind of man who'd climbed through ambition and wasn't done climbing yet. "Mr. Reed," he said, standing to shake hands, "or do you prefer Crow?" "Elias works fine." "Elias, then. Please, sit. Can I offer you anything? Coffee? Whiskey?" "Information. What exactly are you asking me to do?" Blackwood smiled, appreciated directness, apparently. He sat back down and pulled out a folder. "The frontier is failing," he said without preamble. "Towns like Timber Hollow, dying, lawless, controlled by whoever has the most guns. The territorial system isn't working. Local sheriffs are either corrupt or ineffective. Federal marshals are spread too thin. The army can't be everywhere. We need something new." He opened the folder. Inside were maps, statistics, reports. In the last 5 years, 47 towns have been abandoned due to criminal activity. 112 murders went unsolved. Property crimes are up 300%. And it's getting worse. The railroad's coming, which means more people, more money, more opportunity, and more predators. Blackwood looked up. "We're at a tipping point. Either we establish legitimate law enforcement, or we descend into chaos that'll take decades to recover from. And you think a training program will fix this? I think professional, disciplined, properly trained lawmen will make a difference. I think having standards and accountability will matter. I think teaching men to prevent violence instead of just responding to it will save lives." He paused. "I think you're the man who can build that system." "Why me? There are military officers with more training, lawmen with more experience. None of them are Jacob Reed. None of them wrote the manual, literally wrote it, I've read your notes, on close quarters combat. None of them trained half the effective gunmen in 3 territories. And more importantly, none of them have lived with the consequences of their training going wrong." Blackwood leaned forward. "I don't need someone who thinks violence is glorious. I need someone who knows it's ugly and necessary and should be avoided whenever possible. That's you." Elias studied the maps, saw the scope of what Blackwood was proposing. 50 men initially, eventually 200, multiple training facilities, a whole infrastructure of law enforcement spreading across the territories. "My conditions," he said. "Name them." "I design everything, curriculum, selection criteria, evaluation standards. You provide resources and authority, but you don't interfere with methodology." "Agreed." "I choose my own instructors. No political appointments, no governor's nephew who needs a job. People I trust, or nobody." "Agreed." "And if I think this isn't working, if I see it becoming what I fear it could become, I walk. No arguments, no negotiations, I end it." Blackwood hesitated on that one. That's a significant amount of power to give one man. "It's the only way I'll do this. Take it or leave it." The governor was quiet for a long moment. Then he smiled. "You're exactly as stubborn as Hendricks said you'd be. All right. Agreed. You have complete autonomy. Build me something that works." They shook hands. Elias felt the weight of it settle onto him like chains. He'd just committed to the thing he'd been avoiding for 11 years. Teaching violence, building killers, shaping the future through methods he'd sworn off. But maybe, just maybe, he could get it right this time. Maybe restraint could be taught along with speed. Maybe judgment could be valued alongside skill. Maybe the next generation could be better than the last. Maybe. He left the governor's office with more questions than answers, but a direction, at least. something to aim for that wasn't just survival. Outside, Hendricks waited. "Well?" he asked. "I'm doing it." "Good man. Don't congratulate me yet. I haven't actually built anything." "You will, though, because you don't know how to do things halfway." They walked down the hill together as the sun set over Carson City. Behind them, the governor's mansion. Ahead, the future, uncertain and demanding and heavy with the weight of choices that couldn't be undone. But at least it was a future. At least it was something other than hiding. And for the first time in 11 years, that felt almost like enough. The academy started in a converted army barracks 20 miles outside Carson City. 30 recruits showed up the first day. Elias sent 20 of them home before noon. "You're joking," one of the rejected men said. His name was Collins, and he had the look of someone who'd never been told no in his life. "I rode 3 days to get here. I have recommendations from 2 judges and a senator." "I don't care if you have a recommendation from the president himself," Elias said. "You're not what I'm looking for." "And what exactly are you looking for?" "Men who can think." You answered every question like you were reciting from a book, like law enforcement is just following rules without understanding why they exist. Elias gestured toward the gate. "Go be a clerk. You'll do less damage there." Colin's face went red. "You're making a mistake." "I've made plenty. This isn't one of them." By the end of the first week, Elias had sent home 43 of the original 30 recruits and accepted 7 more who'd arrived later. The ones who stayed weren't what anyone expected. They were older, mostly, quieter, men who'd seen enough of life to know violence wasn't glory. One of them was a former schoolteacher named William Cross. He was 38, soft around the middle, with glasses that kept sliding down his nose when he ran drills. Every senior officer who observed the training asked Elias why he'd accepted someone so obviously unsuited for law enforcement. "Watch him think," Elias would say, and if they watched long enough, they'd see what he saw. A man who assessed situations, who asked questions, who valued understanding over reaction. Another was Marcus Webb, a black man who'd worked as a Buffalo soldier before prejudice pushed him out of the army despite being one of their best marksmen. He was 42 and carried himself like someone tired of proving himself but unable to stop. "Why'd you accept my application?" Marcus asked one evening after a particularly brutal day of training. "Most places see my skin and find excuses." "I don't care what color you are," Elias said. "I care whether you can shoot straight and think clearly. You can do both. That's all that matters here." "The governor know you're recruiting Negroes?" "The governor gave me autonomy. What I do with it is my business." Marcus studied him. "You're going to catch hell for this." "Probably, but the territory needs good lawmen more than it needs comfortable politicians." The training was different from what Elias had taught before. Yes, they learned to shoot, accuracy, speed, reload drills, but they also learned de-escalation, negotiation, when to draw and when to walk away, how to read situations before they turned violent. "The goal isn't to be the fastest gun," Elias told them during a lecture in the 3rd week. "The goal is to never need your gun at all. Every time you draw, you've already failed something. Maybe you failed to talk someone down. Maybe you failed to see the danger coming. Maybe you failed to call for backup. The gun is the last resort, not the first response." "But what if talking doesn't work?" one recruit asked. Young kid named Stevens, eager and nervous. "What if they're going to hurt someone?" Then you stop them, quickly, efficiently, with exactly as much force as necessary and no more. You don't shoot to make a statement. You don't shoot to feel powerful. You shoot to end an immediate threat, and then you live with what you did for the rest of your life. Elias paused. "Anyone who thinks killing is easy or glorious can leave now. I won't train you." Nobody left, but some looked uncomfortable, which was exactly what Elias wanted. The first real test came in month 4. The governor arranged for the recruits to work with local law enforcement in Silver Creek, a town with a reputation for Saturday night violence. Elias went with them, observing, evaluating. William Cross drew his weapon once in 3 weeks. A drunk with a knife was threatening his wife outside a saloon. William talked to him for 15 minutes. Calm, patient, never reaching for his gun despite the knife. Eventually the man handed over the weapon and went home to sleep it off. Why didn't you just arrest him? The local sheriff asked afterward. Would have been faster. Faster isn't always better, William said, and now he goes home. Wife doesn't get hurt. He doesn't get hurt. No paperwork. No jail costs. And tomorrow he wakes up embarrassed instead of angry. Everyone wins. The sheriff looked skeptical, but Elias was satisfied. This was what he was trying to build. Men who measured success by what they prevented, not what they confronted. Not everyone got it, though. Stevens, the eager young recruit, shot a man in his second week at Silver Creek. The man had robbed a store and was running. Stevens yelled for him to stop. When he didn't, Stevens fired, hit him in the back, killed him instantly. The investigation cleared Stevens. Man was a known criminal. Armed robbery justified lethal force, but Elias pulled him from the program anyway. Why? Stevens demanded. He was crying, shaking, but also defensive. I did everything by the rules. The inquiry said it was justified. It was legal, Elias said. Doesn't mean it was necessary. He was running away. You could have let him go and caught him later, but you were scared and you reacted instead of thinking. I was doing my job. Your job is to protect people, not execute thieves who are fleeing. You took a life because you were impatient. That's not the kind of lawman I'm building. This is bullshit. You can't kick me out for doing what I was trained to do. I trained you to think first. You didn't. You're done. Stevens left cursing. Elias watched him go and felt the weight of the decision. Maybe he was being too harsh. Maybe the kid would have learned. Maybe giving him a second chance would have been the right call. Or maybe he would have kept shooting first and thinking later, and eventually someone innocent would have paid the price. Elias was building something here. He couldn't afford to compromise on the foundation. The first class graduated after a year, 7 men out of the 30 who'd started. Most governors would have seen that as failure. Blackwood saw it as quality control. 7 highly trained, carefully selected lawmen are worth more than 30 mediocre ones, he said at the graduation ceremony. Small affair, just the graduates and a few officials. These men represent a new standard for frontier law enforcement. They will serve as examples and, eventually, as instructors for the next generation. Elias watched the 7 men receive their badges and commissions. William Cross looked nervous but determined. Marcus Webb stood tall, shoulders back, finally being recognized for what he could do rather than judged for what he looked like. The others, farmers and veterans and ordinary men who'd decided to be more than ordinary, looked ready. He hoped he'd taught them enough. Hoped he'd instilled the right values. Hoped they wouldn't become what he'd been 20 years ago. Mostly, he hoped they'd survive. Over the next 3 years, the program expanded. More recruits. More instructors, including several from that first class. More towns requesting trained lawmen instead of whoever could pin on a badge and pretend authority. The results were mixed. Some of Elias's graduates did exactly what he'd hoped, prevented violence, earned community trust, made their territories safer without making them bloodier. Others struggled. A few failed. One turned out to be corrupt and had to be removed. But the overall trend was positive enough that the territorial government funded expansion. By year 5, there were 40 graduates serving across 6 territories. Crime was down in areas where they worked. So were shootings. Communities reported feeling safer. The model was working. But Elias couldn't shake the feeling he was still missing something. The answer came during a visit to Timber Hollow in the spring of his 6th year running the academy. He hadn't been back since leaving with Rodriguez's cavalry. Hadn't wanted to see what the town had become without him. It had become something better. The saloon was rebuilt. Not by Elias. He'd sold the property to a consortium of townspeople who ran it as a community venture. The main street had expanded. New businesses had opened. The population had grown to almost 200, double what it had been. Martha Cookson met him at the general store. She looked older, they all did, but solid, satisfied. Town's thriving, Elias observed. Turns out people want to live places where they feel safe, she said. Who knew? You did this. We did this, all of us. You just showed us it was possible. She poured him coffee without asking. We heard about your program, heard you're training lawmen the right way. Trying to. David Morrison applied, got accepted last month. He's in your current class. Elias hadn't made the connection. There were 40 recruits in the current class, and he didn't memorize all their applications. David from here? Same one. He's 22 now, grew up wanting to be like you, wanted to make places safer the way you made this place safer. I didn't make it safer. I made it bloodier and then left. Martha laughed. You really believe that? You think the battle was what saved us? The battle just showed us we could fight. What saved us was what came after, the choice to rebuild instead of running, the decision to be more than victims. That's what you taught us. Not how to shoot, how to stand. Elias sat with that, turned it over, wondered if she was right or just being kind. Doc Hayes found him that evening at the rebuilt Saloon. The doctor was grayer, slower, but still sharp. Heard you were in town, he said, sitting down uninvited. Thought you might stop by the clinic. Guess I was wrong. Didn't want to intrude. Since when do you worry about intruding? Doc Hayes ordered whiskey. You built something good here, Elias, whether you want to admit it or not. I started a fight and left other people to clean it up. You showed people they had value worth defending. That's different than cleaning up. He drank. You know why this town survived when so many others died? Because the people here learned they mattered, learned they could shape their own future instead of just accepting whatever came. You taught them that. Not with words, with example. By killing people. By refusing to be a victim. By standing when it would have been easier to kneel. By showing them what it looked like when someone said, enough. Doc Hayes set down his glass. Your academy is doing the same thing on a bigger scale, teaching men that law enforcement isn't about dominance. It's about service, about protecting people instead of controlling them. That's radical, Elias. That's going to change things. Or it's going to fail spectacularly and hurt a lot of people in the process. Might do both. Most important things do. The doctor stood to leave. Stop punishing yourself for having impact. The world needs people willing to take responsibility for change. You're one of them. Be that. Elias sat alone in the saloon, his saloon, or what it used to be, and thought about responsibility, about change, about whether what he was building would last or just be another mistake in a long line of mistakes. He didn't have answers, but sitting there in Timber Hollow, seeing what the town had become, he felt something he hadn't felt in years. Not quite hope, but close enough. The turning point came during his 8th year running the academy. One of his graduates, a man named Porter, no relation to Jack, was killed in the line of duty, ambushed while trying to serve a warrant, shot in the back by someone he'd been trying to arrest peacefully. The news hit Elias like a physical blow. He'd trained Porter personally, taught him everything he knew about staying alert, reading situations, protecting yourself while protecting others, and it hadn't been enough. He almost shut down the whole program that day, almost walked into Blackwood's office and ended it. Because what was the point if good men still died? What was the point of all this training and philosophy and careful selection if one bullet could end everything anyway? But then Porter's widow came to see him. Her name was Elizabeth. She had 2 children, both under 10. She looked exhausted and grieving and angry. Elias prepared himself for blame, for her to tell him this was his fault for training her husband to be a target. Instead, she said, "Thank you." Elias just stared. James loved what he did, she continued. He used to come home and tell me about his work, about talking people down instead of shooting them, about helping communities instead of controlling them, about being the kind of lawman his children could be proud of. Her voice broke. He died doing what mattered to him, what you taught him to value. That's not nothing. He died because I didn't teach him enough, Elias said. Didn't prepare him enough. You taught him that his life had purpose beyond himself. That's more than most men get. Elizabeth stood. I'm not here to make you feel better. I'm here to tell you not to stop, because if you stop, James died for nothing. But if you keep training men like him, men who value life, who try to prevent violence instead of causing it, then maybe his death means something. She left. Elias sat in his office until dark, turning her words over. He didn't shut down the program. Instead, he doubled down, added more training on threat assessment, more scenarios, more emphasis on backup and caution. He couldn't prevent every death, but he could prepare his students better, could give them every advantage he knew how to give. That was all anyone could do. The the best they could with what they had. By year 10, the Frontier Marshal Program had graduated 214 men. They served across 12 territories. Crime in their jurisdictions was down 40%. Deaths during law enforcement activities were down 60%. Communities reported higher satisfaction with their lawmen than any previous system had achieved. The model was being copied. Other territories wanted their own programs. The federal government was watching, considering implementation nationwide. What had started as one old gunfighter trying to atone for past mistakes had become a movement. Elias was 68 now. His hands shook when he was tired. His leg ached where he'd been shot 8 years ago. His back protested every morning. But he still taught, still evaluated recruits, still maintained the standards he'd set. One afternoon, Governor Blackwood visited the academy. He was older too, grayer, but riding high on political success. The Frontier Marshal Program was his signature achievement. He'd be using it to run for senator. "Congratulations," he told Elias in his office. "You built exactly what I asked for. Better, actually. This has exceeded every expectation. It's had good days and bad days. More good than bad, though. The statistics don't lie." "Statistics never tell the whole truth either," Blackwood smiled. "Ever the pessimist. Has anyone told you it's okay to accept success? Success feels temporary, like it could all fall apart if I stop paying attention. Then don't stop. Keep building. Keep refining. You've got another 10 years in you easily." But Elias wasn't sure he did. Wasn't sure he wanted to. He'd given a decade to this project. Maybe that was enough. Maybe it was time to let someone younger take over, someone with more energy, more hope. The decision made itself during graduation that spring. David Morrison was in the graduating class, the kid from Timber Hollow, now a man of 26. He'd excelled in training, top of his class in marksmanship and tactical thinking. More importantly, he understood what Elias had been trying to teach about restraint and judgment. After the ceremony, David approached him. "Thank you," the young man said, "for everything, for Timber Hollow, for this program, for showing me what law enforcement could be. You did the work yourself. You showed me the way, though. You and Mr. Cross and Marshal Webb, all the instructors. You built something that matters." Elias studied him, saw determination there, competence, and something else, genuine care for people. Not everyone who graduated had that. But the ones who did, they were the ones who'd carry this forward. "Where are you assigned?" Elias asked. "Timber Hollow. They requested me specifically. Town's grown to almost 400 now, needs proper law enforcement. Sheriff Miller's retiring. They want me to take over." "That's good. You'll do well there." David hesitated. "Can I ask you something? Do you think we can actually change things, long term, or are we just holding back the tide until we get tired?" It was the question Elias had been asking himself for 10 years. The question that kept him up at night. The question that made him wonder if any of this mattered. "I don't know," he said honestly. "Maybe we're just buying time. Maybe the frontier will always be violent and ugly and hard. Maybe all we're doing is making it slightly less bloody for a little while. That's not very inspiring. No. But here's what I do know. Every person who doesn't get killed because one of our graduates talked instead of shooting, that person matters. Every community that feels safe because they've got a lawman who values their lives, that matters. Every kid who grows up without seeing casual violence, that matters too." Elias looked at the young man he'd first met as a terrified 16-year-old. "We can't fix everything. We can't create paradise. But we can make things a little better, a little safer, a little more just. That's not nothing, David. That's everything." David nodded slowly. "Then I'll go to Timber Hollow and make it a little better. That's all I ask." Elias retired 6 months later, handed the academy over to Marcus Webb, who'd become one of his best instructors. The program would continue, probably change, hopefully improve, but it would continue. He thought about going back to Timber Hollow, but the town didn't need him anymore. It had David. It had community. It had become what he'd hoped it might. Instead, he bought a small cabin outside Carson City. Quiet place. No neighbors close by. Just him in the wilderness and time to think. Doc Hayes visited occasionally. So did Hendricks when Marshall business brought him through. A few graduates stopped by to check on him. But mostly Elias was alone, which was how he preferred it. He was 73 when the infection from an old wound finally caught up with him. Doc Hayes did what he could, but some things couldn't be fixed. Elias declined being taken to a hospital, preferred to die in his own bed. On his last day, clear-headed despite the pain, he had visitors. Marcus Webb came. So did William Cross, now a senior instructor. David Morrison rode 3 days from Timber Hollow. Even Governor Blackwood showed up, older and grayer, but still politically sharp. The program's trained over 500 lawmen now, Blackwood told him. It's being implemented in 14 territories. The model's being studied back east. What you built, it's going to outlive all of us. Elias managed a weak smile. That was sort of the point. When the others had left, David stayed. I named my son after you, he said quietly. Elias Morrison. Figured I owed you that much. You don't owe me anything? I owe you everything. Timber Hollow owes you everything. Hell, half the frontier owes you whether they know it or not. I just taught you to shoot and think. You did the rest. You taught us we mattered, that we could be more than victims, that standing up was possible. David's voice cracked. I tell people about you, about the bartender who stood up to Brock Vance, about the teacher who built something better than what came before, about the man who proved that strength isn't about drawing first, it's about knowing when not to draw at all. Elias closed his eyes, felt tired, felt ready. Don't make me into something I wasn't, he whispered. I was just a man who made mistakes and tried to fix them, that's all. Maybe that's all anyone is, David said. But you tried, and you fixed more than you broke. That counts for something. Elias died that night. Peaceful. As peaceful as any death gets when you've lived the kind of life he'd lived. They buried him outside Carson City with military honors. The Frontier Marshal Program sent representatives. Towns where his graduates served sent letters. Even people from Timber Hollow made the journey. The funeral was well attended, but Elias wouldn't have cared about that. What he would have cared about, what he did care about in those last lucid moments, was whether the thing he'd built would last, whether the men he'd trained would remember why they'd been trained, whether the system would hold. It did. Not perfectly. Nothing human ever is. But it held. Over the next 20 years, the Frontier Marshal Program became the standard for law enforcement across the Western territories. Violence decreased. Communities stabilized. The frontier became less wild not through force, but through systems that valued prevention over reaction. Men trained in Elias's methods became sheriffs, marshals, eventually police chiefs in growing cities. They trained others who trained others. The philosophy spread: de-escalation over confrontation, service over dominance, thinking over reacting. Timber Hollow grew into a town of 2,000. David Morrison served as sheriff for 30 years, training his own deputies in the methods he'd learned. When he retired, the crime rate was the lowest in the territory. People felt safe. Kids grew up without learning to flinch at every loud noise. William Cross eventually ran the academy. He refined Elias's curriculum, added new techniques, adapted to changing times. But he kept the core principles, the emphasis on judgment, on restraint, on valuing every life, even the ones you might have to take. Marcus Webb became the first black territorial marshal. His appointment caused controversy, but his record silenced critics. He served with distinction for 18 years before retiring to teach, passing on what Elias had taught him about fairness and competence, mattering more than prejudice. The men Elias trained went on to train thousands more. The system he built became institution. The values he fought for became standard. And somewhere in all that, in the gradual civilizing of the frontier, in the slow replacement of might makes right with actual justice, Elias Crow's legacy lived on. Not as the fastest gun, not as the legendary instructor, not even as the man who killed Brock Vance, but as the man who'd proven that real strength wasn't in drawing first. It was in knowing when not to draw at all, in choosing to build instead of destroy, and taking responsibility for the future instead of just surviving the present. He'd been a killer who became a teacher, a warrior who learned to value peace, a man who'd made terrible mistakes and spent the rest of his life trying to prevent others from making the same ones. He wasn't perfect. The system he built wasn't perfect, but both were better than what had come before. And in the end, that was enough. Years after his death, when historians wrote about the transformation of the American frontier, they mentioned Elias Crow in footnotes. A minor figure, they said, an interesting case study in law enforcement reform. But the men and women who actually lived through that transformation, who saw towns change from lawless to livable, who raised children without fear, who experienced justice instead of just power, they knew different. They knew Elias Crow had changed everything, not through speed or violence or domination, but through the quiet, difficult work of building something better and teaching others to maintain it. That was his real legacy, not the bodies in the street at Timber Hollow, not the dramatic confrontation that made his name known again, but the thousands of confrontations that never happened because someone he trained knew how to talk instead of shoot. The lives saved because de-escalation became doctrine. The communities that thrived because law enforcement meant protection instead of control. In the end, the quiet bartender who just wanted to be left alone had shaped the frontier more than any gunfighter ever could, not by being the fastest, but by being wise enough to know that speed wasn't the answer, that real change came slow, came through teaching, came through building systems that outlasted any one person, came through choosing, every single day, to be more than just your worst moment. That was what Elias Crow had learned, and that was what he'd taught. And in the hard, beautiful, imperfect story of the American West transforming from wilderness to civilization, that lesson mattered more than any quick draw ever could.